They told you medieval art was simple, primitive, just saints, halos, and silence. But what if I told you those paintings were never meant to be understood at first glance? What if hidden beneath the gold leaf and solemn faces, there were codes, messages meant only for those who knew how to see? Walk into a medieval cathedral, and the first thing you feel isn't beauty. It's weight. Stone pressing down on your chest, shadows that seem to move when you're not looking, candles flickering like nervous thoughts, and everywhere you turn, eyes, painted eyes, watching, waiting, judging. But these walls were never just decoration. They were language, a language built in an age where most people couldn't read, yet were surrounded by stories more complex than any book. In a world ruled by fear of the divine, art became the secret scripture. Every color whispered something. Blue wasn't just blue, it was the divine, the unreachable. Red wasn't just blood, it was sacrifice, power, violence. Even the smallest gesture, a hand slightly raised, a finger pointing, could alter the entire meaning of a scene. To the untrained eye, it looked like devotion, but to those who understood, it was instruction, warning, sometimes even rebellion. Because medieval artists were not as free as we imagine, they worked under the gaze of the church, under strict rules of what could and could not be shown. And yet within those rigid boundaries, something dangerous began to grow. A hidden layer, a second voice that didn't speak loudly, but never truly stayed silent. Take the halos, for example, those glowing circles above the heads of saints. They seem innocent, obvious, but their shape, their size, even their position was never accidental. A perfectly round halo symbolized divine perfection, but when it tilted, when it broke perspective, it hinted at something unstable, something human creeping into the divine. And sometimes artists painted halos so faint, so fragile that they almost disappeared, as if holiness itself was slipping away. And then there were the animals, strange creatures hiding in the corners of sacred scenes, dogs that looked too alert, birds staring directly at the viewer, grotesque hybrid beasts crawling along the edges of manuscripts. They weren't random, each carried meaning. A dog could symbolize loyalty or blind obedience. A bird could represent the soul or a spy between worlds. Some creatures warned of sin while others hinted at hidden knowledge. And the margins of medieval art were not decoration but the subconscious of the painting, where truth could hide without being condemned. But the real codes, the ones that linger, were hidden in gestures and gazes. Look closely at a painting of the Last Supper from the medieval period. At first it's familiar, Christ at the center, disciples surrounding him. But then you notice something unsettling. Not all eyes are on Christ. Some figures look away, some stare into darkness. Some seem to look directly at you. And suddenly the painting shifts, no longer a moment frozen in time, but a network of attention, suspicion, and silent knowledge being passed between figures. Who knows what? Who suspects betrayal? Who is already lost? In an age obsessed with sin, betrayal wasn't just an event, it was a presence, and artists captured that presence not with words but with direction. A turned head, a shadow falling the wrong way, a hand that doesn't quite belong, small distortions that whisper that something is wrong here. And sometimes the codes went further. There are paintings where figures seem duplicated, the same face appearing twice in a single scene. Some say it was a mistake, a limitation of skill, but others believe it was intentional. Watch until the end for more. If this interests you, please hit like and subscribe. A way of showing transformation or a hidden narrative unfolding within the visible one. A man who is both sinner and saint. A woman who is both mortal and divine. A duality that could never be spoken aloud but could be painted. Even architecture itself became part of the code. Backgrounds in medieval art are rarely neutral. A doorway behind a figure might symbolize transition. A narrow window, the confinement of the soul. A staircase leading nowhere, a journey that cannot be completed. And then there are doors that are always closed, as if something inside must never be seen. But why hide these meanings at all? Why not speak clearly? Because clarity was dangerous. The church dictated truth, and to question that truth, even subtly, was to risk everything. So artists learned to bend meaning without breaking rules, creating images that could be read in two ways. One for the masses, one for those who dared to look deeper. It was a quiet rebellion, not loud enough to be punished, but strong enough to survive. Some believe these hidden codes preserved forbidden ideas, philosophies older than Christianity, symbols from pagan traditions, even early scientific observations disguised. Within religious imagery, a plant painted with unnatural precision, a star placed slightly off from tradition, details that feel too intentional to be ignored. And then there are the faces. Medieval faces are often described as emotionless, but that's only if you look quickly. Slow down, and something else emerges. A faint sadness in the eyes, tension in the lips, a gaze that doesn't quite match the scene, as if the figures themselves know something they cannot say. In some works, the Virgin Mary does not look directly at her child, her gaze drifting past him into something distant, something unseen, as if she already knows the ending, as if the painting is not about the present, but about the inevitable future. And that's when you realize medieval art is not static. It moves, not physically but psychologically, pulling you into a space where time collapses, where past, present, and future exist in a single frame, and within that collapse the codes begin to speak. They tell you about fear, control, a world where every action was watched not just by society but by God, a world where sin could hide in the smallest detail, a misplaced gesture, a wrong color, a symbol misunderstood. But they also tell you something else. They tell you that even in a world of absolute control, the human mind found a way to remain free, because hiding a message is not just an act of fear, it's an act of defiance. And the deeper you look, the more unsettling it becomes, because some of these codes we still don't fully understand. There are symbols whose meanings have been lost, patterns that repeat across centuries without clear explanation, faces that resemble people who shouldn't exist in that time, details that suggest knowledge that feels out of place, and you begin to wonder whether these artists were simply encoding religious meaning or leaving something behind for us, something meant to be discovered centuries later, a warning, a truth, a question. Because here's the most disturbing part. Once you learn to see these codes, you can't unsee them. Every painting becomes unstable. Every image feels layered. What once looked simple now feels deliberate, calculated, alive, and suddenly medieval art is no longer distant but uncomfortably close, as if those silent figures have been watching all along, as if they knew one day someone would finally understand. The truth is buried in art. Subscribe and uncover it.